Have you ever walked into a room and felt the air change? Felt the temperature drop, the conversations pause, and the weight of a dozen pairs of eyes settle on you, not with curiosity, but with judgment. It's a feeling that sinks into your bones, a silent announcement that you, for some reason you can't quite name, do not belong. Hold that feeling. Remember it. Because that is exactly where our story begins. The rain over Atlanta that Tuesday was relentless, a cold gray sheet that washed the color from the world. But inside, the Armory, the exclusive tactical supplies store nestled in the heart of the wealthy Buckhead district, the world was anything but gray. It was a cathedral of power bathed in the warm, focused light of 1,000 tiny spotlights. The air was thick, heavy with the scent of polished steel, expensive leather, and a particular kind of entitlement you can't buy, only inherit. This wasn't just a gun store. It was a private club, a lion's den, where the city's powerful came to admire their own reflections in gleaming glass cases filled with weapons that cost more than most people's cars. The quiet, self-important chatter was the only sound, a low hum of deals being made and egos being stroked. And into that den, a ghost appeared. Her name was Zara. She didn't so much as walk in as she did materialize from the rain, a simple figure in a worn dark coat, the shoulders damp from the storm. Her work boots, scuffed and practical, made no sound on the polished concrete floor. She carried nothing but a small, unassuming backpack, and she moved with an economy of motion that made her seem almost invisible. She was a stark contrast to the room's carefully curated display of wealth and power. The first to notice her was Kevin, a young clerk whose perfectly manicured goatee and smug expression were part of his uniform. He saw her, and his eyes immediately narrowed in a quick, dismissive appraisal. He leaned over to a father and son duo, admiring a gold-plated desert eagle. The father, a man named Mr. Henderson, who carried himself with the unearned confidence of old money, and his son Kyle, who wore his father's arrogance like a hand-me-down suit, both turned to look. Kevin's voice was just loud enough to carry. "The thrift store is 2 blocks down, ma'am." The comment hung in the air, a perfectly crafted piece of social cruelty. Now, let's stop here for a moment. That wasn't just a rude remark. It was a weapon. It was a calculated act of othering, a way to draw a line in the sand and declare, "You are on the wrong side of it." It's a tactic as old as time, used to make someone feel small, to make them question their right to even exist in a space of power or expertise. If you've ever walked into a corporate boardroom, a luxury car dealership, or even a parent-teacher meeting at a wealthy school, and felt that immediate sting of prejudice, then you know exactly the kind of weapon Kevin had just used. Kyle Henderson chimed in with a snort. "Probably looking for the bus station. Easy to get lost in this part of town if you don't belong." They watched her, expecting a reaction, a flinch, an angry retort, perhaps a hasty, embarrassed retreat back into the rain. They expected her to break, but Zara did not break. She simply paused, her gaze sweeping across the room, not with intimidation, but with a quiet, unnerving assessment. Her eyes, the color of dark, still water, seemed to absorb everything: the placement of the security cameras, the subtle tension in Mr. Henderson's shoulders, the way Kevin's confidence was just a fragile mask for his own insecurity. She saw it all, and in her silence, the power dynamic of the room began to tremble, though no one but her seemed to notice. She stood there, a portrait of calm, in a sea of arrogance, proving a lesson that life teaches. The hard way, your silence in the face of disrespect is not weakness. It is the calm before the storm of your competence. Slowly, deliberately, she walked towards the main counter, her worn boots finally making a soft, rhythmic sound on the floor. The lions watched their smirks still in place, completely unaware that the ghost they'd dismissed was about to speak a name that would haunt the very foundations of their world. Zara reached the gleaming mahogany counter. Kevin leaned forward, resting his weight on his elbows, his smirk widening. He was enjoying this, the simple pleasure of putting someone he deemed lesser in their place. He looked her up and down one more time, taking in the worn coat and tired boots. "So," he began, his voice dripping with condescension. "What can I get for you? A keychain, perhaps? A souvenir to remember your little trip to the big city?" Zara met his gaze. Her eyes were perfectly still, and for the first time, Kevin felt a flicker of something uncomfortable, a sense of being seen, truly seen, not as a clerk in a fancy store, but as the small, insecure man he was. The feeling passed as quickly as it came, and his arrogance resurfaced. Her voice, when it came, was not loud. It was not angry. It was quiet, clear, and cut through the ambient noise of the store like a razor through silk. "I would like to see the XR9 Shadowfang prototype." Silence. Not a gradual quiet, but a sudden, absolute void of sound. The Hendersons' conversation stopped mid-word. The low hum of the climate control suddenly seemed deafening. It was as if she had spoken a forbidden word, a spell that had frozen the very air in the room. The name hung there, shimmering alien. XR9, Shadowfang. Now you have to understand. This wasn't a name you find in a catalog or on some gun enthusiast blog. The Shadowfang was a ghost, a myth whispered about in the darkest corners of the intelligence community. It was a black ops project from the chaos of the early 2000s, a weapon designed by a reclusive, almost mythical gunsmith for a phantom unit known only as the Umbra Initiative. A unit so secret its existence was officially denied by every government agency. They said fewer than 10 were ever made, and each one was personally assigned to an operator who was more shadow than soldier. To ask for the Shadowfang wasn't like asking for a rare car. It was like walking into a library and asking to see a book that was never written. Kevin was the first to break the silence, a harsh, ugly laugh that sounded forced. "The what? The shadow what, lady? I don't know what video game you've been playing, but we don't sell fantasy props here." He turned to his high-tech inventory system, tapping dramatically on the screen. "See, I'll even check for you. X, R? Nope, big surprise. It doesn't exist." He looked back at her, his smugness restored, expecting her to finally crumble in embarrassment. But then a second sound broke the silence. A metallic clatter from a dusty corner of the shop. An old man, a gunsmith, who had been working there since before Kevin was born, had dropped a tool. He was staring at Zara, his face ashen. His eyes, usually clouded with age, were now wide, with a look that wasn't just surprise. It was fear. A deep, primal fear, the kind you see in an animal that has just recognized the scent of a predator it thought long extinct. He knew the name, and he wasn't the only one. The door to the back office burst open. A portly man in an expensive suit, the store's owner, rushed out, his face pale and beaded with sweat. He wasn't looking at Kevin or the Hendersons. His eyes were locked on Zara. He had a small earpiece in, and it was clear he'd heard her request on a security feed. He scrambled towards the counter, his hands held up in a placating gesture. "Mr. Henderson," he said, his voice trembling slightly, "if you and your son wouldn't mind, perhaps you could browse our optics section for a moment. We need some privacy here." The request was so bizarre, so out of character, that the Hendersons were stunned into obedience. They watched dumbfounded as the owner approached Zara, not as a lost tourist, but with a level of profound deference that bordered on terror. The power dynamic of the room didn't just shift. It was utterly annihilated, shattered into a million pieces by a single impossible question. The lions were silent now. Their den had been invaded not by a ghost, but by something far more terrifying, a legend. And they all stood there, trapped in the wreckage of their own arrogance, realizing they had made a terrible, terrible mistake. It's a powerful reminder, isn't it, that knowledge is the quietest and most devastating weapon of all. You don't ever need to shout when the truth you hold is a thunderclap. And the thunder was just beginning to roll. The owner, a man named Mr. Thompson, who was used to commanding respect, now moved with the nervous energy of a servant. He placed a heavy black pelican case on the mahogany counter. It landed not with a crash, but with a solid, definitive thud that seemed to absorb all the remaining sound in the room. The 4 latches on the case were opened with a series of loud, satisfying clicks, each one a beat, in a drum roll of anticipation. He lifted the lid, and there, nestled in a perfect cutout of high-density foam, was the ghost. The XR9 Shadowfang. It wasn't shiny or ornate. It was the color of a moonless night, a matte black that seemed to drink the light around it. There were no flashy engravings, no gold trim. Every line, every angle was brutally efficient, designed for a single purpose. This was not a showpiece. This was an instrument of terrifying precision. Zara didn't reach for it. Her hands, calloused and steady, hovered over the weapon for a long moment, her expression unreadable. To the others, it might have looked like hesitation, but it wasn't. It was reverence. A quiet personal moment of reunion. Then her fingers finally made contact, and it was like watching a master violinist pick up a Stradivarius. Her touch was intimate, familiar. She lifted the Shadowfang from its case, the weapon seeming impossibly light in her hands, an extension of her own body. Kevin, still reeling, tried to salvage a scrap of his authority. "Be careful with that," he stammered. "That's a very sensitive piece of—" He never finished the sentence. In a blur of motion so fast it was difficult to track, Zara began to field-strip the weapon. There was no wasted movement, no fumbling. It was a symphony of controlled violence, a sequence of clicks, slides, and metallic whispers as she disassembled the rifle with surgical precision. The magazine, the bolt carrier group, the trigger assembly, one by one, the components were laid out on the counter in perfect practiced order. The entire process took less than 10 seconds. The room was stone silent. The owner's jaw was slack. The Hendersons looked like they had just witnessed an act of impossible magic. This wasn't the work of a hobbyist. This was the muscle memory of a master burned into her nerves through thousands of hours of repetition in places they couldn't even imagine. Then she did something strange. She ignored the main components and picked up one of the smallest pieces, the gas block. She held it up to the light, turning it over in her fingers. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched her lips. "It's still here," she whispered so quietly, it was almost to herself. She placed it on the counter and pointed to a spot on the metal. "Look!" The owner leaned in, squinting. "What is it?" "A scratch. It's an offset," Zara said, her voice now calm and instructional. "The gas port is misaligned by 0.02 millimeters, a manufacturing flaw." Kevin saw his chance. A flicker of his old arrogance returned. "See," he blurted out. "It's defective, a piece of junk." Zara looked up at him, and the faint smile on her face was gone, replaced by an expression of pity. "No," she said simply, "it's the maker's mark." She looked back at the owner. The man who designed this rifle, he was a genius but a paranoid one. He built this flaw into each of the prototypes he made. It's a silent signature. It doesn't affect the weapon's performance in any way, but it's a detail only the handful of operators who were trained to use it would ever know to look for. She had just authenticated herself in a way that was more definitive than any ID card or secret password. She hadn't just handled the weapon, she had revealed its deepest secret. And in that moment, the arrogance in the room didn't just evaporate. It curdled into a cold, sickening dread. We'll explore that feeling. It's the fear that comes when you realize the world is not what you thought it was, and that you have just insulted someone who operates on a level you cannot possibly comprehend. Their privilege, their money, their social standing, it was all a paper shield against a hurricane. They saw a woman in a worn-out coat, but they were finally starting to understand that they were standing in the presence of a legend. This is the moment of truth that so many of us crave. The quiet, undeniable display of expertise that silences all the doubters without a single boastful word. It reminds us of a profound lesson: true mastery needs no audience. It is a silent, intimate dialogue between the artist and their craft. Let your actions and your actions alone be your only credential. But Zara's demonstration wasn't over. She had shown them she knew the soul of the weapon. Now she was about to show them what it could do. Zara reassembled the Shadow Fang with the same blinding speed she had used to take it apart. It was not a task. It was a ritual. Each component slid into place with a satisfying click, a perfect mechanical harmony. In seconds, the weapon was whole again, resting in her hands as if it had never been anything but. She gave the owner a slight nod, a silent request. He understood immediately, practically tripping over himself to lead the way. The range. Yes, of course, this way. It's our best state-of-the-art. His voice trailed off as he realized how foolish he sounded, trying to sell his fancy range to a woman who had likely forgotten more about shooting than he would ever know. She followed him to the indoor range, a long tunnel of concrete and sound-dampening foam. The air was cool and smelled of cordite. Kevin and the Hendersons trailed behind their arrogance, now replaced by a morbid, fearful curiosity. They were like spectators at their own execution, unable to look away. Zara took her place in the shooting lane, loading a single brass-cased round into the chamber. The sound, a sharp click-clack, echoed in the silent range. She ignored the paper targets, the steel plates, the high-tech digital displays. Her gaze went past all of it through the reinforced glass at the far end of the range to the world outside. It was Kyle, the son, who finally broke the silence. His voice was brittle, a desperate attempt to claw back some of the power he had so easily lost. "Talk is cheap," he scoffed, though the words lacked any real conviction. "Anyone can take apart a gun. Let's see you shoot." He pointed a trembling finger towards the window. "See that tree? There's a small wind chime hanging from one of the branches, 200 yards out at least. Bet you can't even hit that." It was a fool's challenge meant to be impossible. The wind chime was a tiny speck, its thin silver chain all but invisible, dancing unpredictably in the wind and rain. Hitting the chime itself would be a miracle. Hitting the chain was a statistical absurdity. Zara didn't answer him. She didn't even look at him. She simply raised the Shadow Fang. But she didn't raise it to her shoulder. She didn't press her eye to the high-powered scope. She held it at her hip, angled slightly upwards, in a stance that seemed impossibly casual. She took a single slow breath, her body perfectly still. For a heartbeat, the entire world seemed to hold its breath with her. She was not aiming. She was feeling the weight of the rifle, the whisper of the wind, the path the bullet would take. Then she fired. The sound was not a deafening roar, but a sharp, clean crack that split the air. For a moment, nothing happened. The wind chime continued to dance in the rain. Kyle's lips began to curl into a relieved, scornful smirk. She missed. And then it happened. The wind chime didn't explode. It didn't shatter. It simply dropped. It fell straight down, disappearing into the wet grass below its fall, silent and graceful. She hadn't hit the chime. She had severed the impossibly thin chain that held it. This is the moment. This is that beautiful, cinematic, soul-satisfying release that everyone who has ever been doubted dreams of. It's not a moment of rage or revenge. It is a moment of pure, undeniable, and silent truth. It's a powerful lesson for all of us. When you are challenged by small people, never accept the challenge on their terms. Don't play their petty games which are designed only to validate your worth to them. Instead, set a standard so far beyond their comprehension that it redefines the game entirely. Zara's shot wasn't an answer to Kyle's taunt. It was a statement written in physics and skill, in a language he would never understand. The four men in the room stood frozen, the silence now heavier than anything they had ever felt. The echo of the single shot had faded, but its meaning would reverberate in their minds forever. They had witnessed the impossible. They had mocked a force of nature. And as they stood there trying to process what they had just seen, the soft chime of the front door's bell rang through the shop, signaling the arrival of someone new. The real reason Zara was here had just walked in. Zara methodically cleaned the shadow fang, her movements precise and unhurried. The impossible shot still hung in the air, a silent testament to her skill. The men, Kevin the Hendersons, the owner, were statues trapped in a tableau of their own shattered arrogance. They were so focused on the ghost in front of them that they didn't hear the bell on the front door chime softly. The newcomer was a woman. She was the polar opposite of Zara in every superficial way. Tall, impeccably dressed in a tailored black suit that spoke of quiet, immense power, she moved with the confident grace of a panther. Her presence instantly commanded the room not through noise or bluster, but through an aura of absolute authority. She was a storm system that had moved indoors, and the pressure in the room dropped. She paid no attention to the owner or his stunned customers. Her eyes, sharp and intelligent, found Zara and stayed there. It was the old gunsmith, the man in the dusty corner, who spoke first. His voice was a dry, rasping whisper filled with a reverence that was almost religious. "Nix!" The name wasn't spoken to anyone. It was an utterance, a recognition of a legend. In the old myths, Nyx was the primordial goddess of the night, a being of shadow and power from which all other mysteries were born. It was not a name. It was a title. It was a code name for a ghost who hunted in the darkest corners of the world. The woman in the suit walked to the counter, her heels making soft, authoritative clicks on the concrete floor. She ignored everyone else. She looked at Zara, and a flicker of something respect-camaraderie passed between them. There was no overt salute, no secret handshake. The world they inhabited was far too subtle for that. Instead, she reached into her pocket and placed a small antique chess piece on the counter. It was a knight carved from black onyx. "The board is set," she said, her voice low and even. Zara slid the final piece of the shadow fang back into place. She didn't look up. "And the shadows are moving," she replied. "And here, my friends, is the twist. This is where the story you thought you were listening to peels back to reveal a much deeper, more intricate game." Zara didn't come to this store to buy a rifle. She didn't come here to teach a lesson to a few arrogant men. That was just a fortunate byproduct. The rifle, the impossible request, the demonstration of skill, it was all a key. A complex, dangerous verification protocol to prove she was who she said she was, in a place where she could not be electronically tracked. The entire visit was a mission. The woman in the suit slid a tiny, nondescript data chip across the counter. It was no bigger than a fingernail, but it likely held secrets that could topple governments. That was the true objective. The Shadowfang was just the password. Zara palmed the chip, making it disappear with a sleight of hand so smooth it was invisible. Mission accomplished. This moment teaches us something profound about belonging. The most important conversations in our lives often happen in codes and symbols, in shared glances and unspoken understandings. They are understood only by those who belong to the same tribe, who have walked the same difficult paths. When you find those people, you no longer have to explain your scars. They already know the language they are written in. Find your tribe. With a final silent nod, Zara slid the Shadowfang back across the counter towards the owner. Her work here was done. She turned, and together the two women, the Ghost and the Commander Nyx and the Shadow, walked towards the door, leaving behind a room full of broken men and a silence that would last a very, very long time. They left them to grapple with a new, terrifying reality that the world was not run by the loud men in the front rooms, but by the quiet women who moved through the shadows. And for some of them, the consequences of that realization were just beginning. After Zara and the woman in the suit disappeared back into the rain, a silence descended upon the armory. It was a new kind of silence, different from the one that had followed Zara's impossible question. That had been a silence of shock and awe. This was a silence of reckoning. It was heavy thick with the ghosts of stupid words and the bitter taste of regret. The owner, Mr. Thompson, and the Hendersons stood frozen, not looking at each other, each man alone in the wreckage of his own pride. You see, the universe has a strange and often beautiful way of balancing its books. Zara never sought revenge. People like her people who operate on that level don't have time for such petty emotions. She likely never thought of those men again. But that's the thing about arrogance and prejudice. You don't need an enemy to destroy you. You just need a mirror. Zara had been their mirror, and now they were left to deal with the ugly reflections they'd been shown. The consequences that followed were not an act of revenge. They were simply the ripples spreading from the stones they themselves had thrown. Let's follow those ripples. First there was Kevin. The next morning, Mr. Thompson called him into the back office. There was no yelling, no angry tirade, just a cold, quiet finality. On the monitor was the security footage from the day before. Thompson played it without sound. He played the moment Kevin sneered, "The thrift store is 2 blocks down." He played the moment Kyle Henderson laughed. He played the moment Zara's hands moved like a surgeon's, and the moment she fired a shot that defied the laws of physics. Then he turned to Kevin. "This store," he said, his voice like ice, "is built on one thing: discernment, the ability to recognize quality and danger. Yesterday, the most discerning customer I have ever had walked through that door, and you failed the test in every conceivable way. You are a liability." Kevin was fired. But his humiliation didn't end there. That silent security footage became the centerpiece of the Armory's new employee training program, titled simply, "How to Lose a $1 Million Client in 10 Seconds. His failure became a permanent lesson. Then there were the Hendersons. About a week later, Mr. Henderson was in his skyscraper office overlooking Atlanta when he received an email. A multi-million-dollar government security contract his company had been poised to win had been abruptly and inexplicably canceled. When his frantic calls were finally answered, the reason given was a single devastating line: "Concerns have been raised regarding the discernment and professional judgment of key personnel." He hung up the phone, the color draining from his face, as he remembered the cool, assessing eyes of the woman in the black suit. He hadn't just been rude to a stranger. He had failed a character audit in front of a client, with the power to build or break his entire company. As for his son Kyle, His downfall was more modern and perhaps more brutal. An anonymous account posted a short, soundless clip on social media. It was the CCTV footage from the range showing his arrogant challenge, followed by the wind chime silently falling from its chain. The clip went viral. The comments were merciless. His carefully curated online persona as a shooting expert and influencer was dismantled overnight. His sponsors dropped him. His followers mocked him. He was a joke. This isn't a story about poetic justice. It's a story about physics. There is a lesson here, a fundamental truth about the world we live in. Character is gravity. For a while you can defy it with the hot air of arrogance or the scaffolding of privilege, but eventually it will always pull your actions down into consequences. You can't escape it. The greatest mistake those men made was believing their little world was the only world, that their actions in the den had no echo in the jungle outside. They learned the hard way that their character built on a foundation of prejudice was destined to collapse. The key is to build your character with integrity, with humility, with respect. Because then you will never have to fear the fall. But this story was never truly about them. Their fall from grace is just the fading echo of a much more important event. The story was always about her. And more importantly, it was always about you. And so we leave them. We leave the quiet, haunted gun store and the men who learned a lesson they would never forget. Because in the end, this story was never really about them. It was never about the XR9 Shadowfang or the Umbra Initiative or the secret missions whispered about in the shadows. This story was always about you. It's about the weight of being underestimated. It's a story for every woman who has had her own expertise explained back to her by a less qualified man. It's for every black man who has been told he has to be twice as good to get half as much. It's for anyone who has ever had to bite their tongue, swallow their pride, and let their work, their actions, their results do the talking for them. You listening to this right now in your car, on the way home from a long shift at your desk, while you whoosh through a thankless task, or in the quiet moments before you try to find sleep, you know what it feels like to be Zara. You have walked into a room and felt the chill of being judged before you've even spoken a word. You've had your worth measured by the clothes you wear or the car you drive. But here is the truth. You have a Shadowfang inside of you. It is your unique, undeniable skill. It is that thing you do better than anyone, that talent you've honed in silence, that knowledge you've earned through struggle. And you have a Nyx within you. It is your resilience. It is your quiet dignity. It is the unbreakable part of your spirit that refuses to let the world's judgment define you. Do not wait for them to see it. Do not wait for their applause or their approval. Walk into your armory, whether it's a boardroom, a classroom, a family gathering, or just the battle inside your own mind. State your truth, not with arrogance, but with the calm confidence of someone who knows their own value, and let them watch in stunned silence as you hit your own impossible shot. Your victory is not in their validation. It is in your own quiet, profound knowledge of exactly who you are. Because you are the legend of your own story. You are the ghost in their machine. Act accordingly. If Zara's story resonated with that quiet, powerful part of you, I would be honored if you would like this video. It lets me know that these are the stories that matter. And I want to build a community here, a tribe for people who understand this journey. So in the comments below, I want you to tell me, what is your Shadowfang? What is that quiet skill, that hidden strength you carry? Let's fill the comments with our power. And if you want to be a part of this tribe and hear more stories of strength survival and the quiet triumphs of the underestimated, make sure you subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell. Thank you for